Thank you, Andrew, and I feel I was shafted too. But I lost out to a book about Al-Qaeda, and when Bombay invades the United States, I'll win the Pulitzer. I don't really have many visuals except the cover of my book, so I feel like a bit of a Luddite, even though I must tell you I used to write for technology magazines, Data, Communications, and Land magazine, and so forth, back in the day, until I read Walden by Henry David Thoreau. And there was a line in Walden where Thoreau writes, I hear that a magnetic telegraph is to be built between Maine and Texas. The question remains whether Maine and Texas have anything to say to each other. So I decided to abandon technology and go back to writing about human beings. And what better place to find human beings, a lot of human beings, than in the city I grew up in, which was Bombay. So I went back to Bombay 21 years after I had left it to find a city called Mumbai. And this is what I found. What does a man look like when he's on fire? I asked Sunil. It was December 1996, and I was sitting in a high-rise apartment in Bombay with a group of men from the Hindu nationalist Shiv Sena party. They were telling me about the riots of 92-93, which followed the destruction of the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya. The two other Shiv Sena men with Sunil looked at each other. They didn't trust me yet, or they were not drunk enough on my cognac. And they said, I wasn't there. The Sena didn't have anything to do with the rioting. Sunil would have none of this. He put down his glass and said, I'll tell you, I was there. A man on fire gets up, falls, runs for his life, falls, gets up, runs. You couldn't bear to see it, he addressed me. It is horror. Oil drips from his body. His eyes become huge, huge. The white shows. White, white. You touch his arm like this. He flicked his arm. The white shows. It shows especially on the nose. He rubbed his nose with 2 fingers as if scraping off the skin. Oil drips from him. Water drips from him. White, white, all over. Those were not days for thought, he continued. We 5 people burnt 1 Mussalman. At 4 a.m., after we heard of Radhabai Chaul, a mob assembled, the likes of which I have never seen. Ladies, gents. They picked up any weapon they could. Then we marched to the Muslim side. We met a bread seller on the highway, on a bicycle. I knew him. He used to sell me bread every day. Sunil held up a piece of bread from the pav bhaji he was eating. I set him on fire. We poured petrol on him and set him on fire. All I thought was that this is a Muslim. He was shaking. He was crying, I have children, I have children. I said, when your Muslims were killing the Radhabai Chaul people, did you think of your children? That day, we showed them what Hindu Dharma is. There will soon be more people living in the island city of Bombay than on the continent of Australia. Herbs Prima in India reads the plaque outside the Gateway of India. It is today the Herbs Prima in Mundis, at least in one area, the first test of the vitality of a city, the number of people living in it. With 15 million people within its municipal limits, Bombay is the biggest city on the planet of a race of city dwellers. Bombay is the future of urban civilization on the planet. God help us. Bombay's population is bigger than that of 173 countries in the world. If it were a country by itself in 2004, it would rank at number 54. By 2015, there will be more people living in Bombay than in all of Italy. The growth of the megacities is an Asian phenomenon. Asia has 11 of the world's 15 biggest cities. Why do Asians like to live in cities? Maybe we like people more. India, contrary to popular belief, is not an overpopulated country. The population density of the country is lower than that of many countries which are not thought of as overpopulated. In 1999, Belgium had a population density of 333 people per square kilometer. The Netherlands, 385, and India, 304. It is the cities of India that are overpopulated. Singapore has a density of 6,500 people per square kilometer, and Berlin, the most crowded European city, 2,900 people per square kilometer. The island city of Bombay in 1990 had a density of 45,000 people per square kilometer. Some parts of central Bombay have a density of 1 million people per square mile. This is the highest number of individuals massed together at any spot in the world. They are not equally dispersed across the island. 2/3 of the city's residents are crowded into just 5% of the total area, while the richer or more rent-protected 1/3 monopolize 95% of the available space. 50 years ago, if you wanted to see where the action was in India, you went to the villages. Mahatma Gandhi famously said, "India is a nation of villages." Back then, they contributed 71% of net domestic product in 1950. Today, you have to go to the cities, which now account for 60% of net domestic product. Bombay alone pays 38% of the nation's taxes. This is what makes Bombay overpopulated, the impoverishment of the countryside, so that a young man with dreams in his head will take the first train to Bombay to live on the sidewalk. If you fix the problems of the villages, you fix, as a happy side effect, the problems of the cities. Bombay is a bird of gold. A man living in a slum without water, without toilets, was telling me why he came here, why people continue to come here. In the Bayview bar of the Oberoi Hotel, you can order a bottle of Dom Perignon for 1.5 times the average annual income. This in a city where 40% of the houses lack safe drinking water. Another man put it differently. Nobody starves to death in Mumbai. He was being very literal. People are still starving to death in other parts of India. In Bombay, there are 150 slimming clinics. Fashionable models, according to the dietitian who operates one of them, are on the verge of anorexia. This is how Bombayites know they've parted company with the rest of India. In any class of society in Bombay, explains the dietitian, there are more people wanting to lose weight than put on weight. It's the biggest, fastest, richest city in India, a city simultaneously experiencing a boom and a civic emergency, an island state of hope in a very old country. If you take a walk around Bombay, you'll see that everything, sex, death, trade, religion, are lived out on the sidewalk. It is a maximum city, maximum in its exigencies, maximum in its heart. On July 27th, Bombay experienced the highest recorded rainfall in its history, 37 inches of rain in one day. The torrent showed up the best and the worst about the city. Hundreds of people drowned. But unlike the situation after Katrina hit New Orleans, there was no widespread breakdown of civic order. Even though the police was absent, the crime rate did not go up. That was because Bombayites were busy helping each other. Slum dwellers went to the highway and took stranded motorists into their homes and made room for one more person in shacks where the average occupancy is 7 adults to a room. Volunteers waded through waist-deep water to bring food to the 150,000 people stranded in train stations. Human chains were formed to get people out of the floods. Most of the government machinery was absent, but nobody expected otherwise. Bombayites helped each other because they had lost faith in the government helping them. This is how most human beings are going to live and cope in the 21st century. Bombay epitomizes a group of megacities in the developing world, such as Sao Paulo, Lagos, and Jakarta. Each of these cities is characterized by uncontrolled migration from the countryside, enormous infrastructural problems, vast shanty towns, constant low-level strife, and yet remain a beacon of hope for the young people of their countries. They serve the same function New York or Chicago did for newly freed Southern blacks in the late 19th century, an exciting place where the young can make a fresh start, escape agricultural drudgery, and chase their dreams. These megacities are growing along very different lines from the cities that have dominated the 20th century, such as New York, London, or Paris, whose growth has stabilized. The first and the third worlds are no longer on opposite ends of the globe. They are contiguous within the same city. There are people in Bombay rich enough to send their shirts to Paris to be laundered. On the other hand, a resident in Harlem has a lower life expectancy than a citizen of Bangladesh. The great cities of America, which people fled for the suburbs in the 1970s and 1980s, are newly attractive places. Paris has always been beautiful because the poor with their problems have been kept out, shunted to the suburbs. American cities like New York are following the same pattern. Crime, which kept the rents affordable, has diminished. And so the poor are displaced by the artists, who are displaced by the bankers, and the poorest are forced out to the inner ring of suburbs. In Bombay, though, the poor live in the armpit of the rich. They have political power. Unorganized housing turns in time into organized settlements serviced with electricity and water. Villages spring up in the city, creating its distinctive geography. Bombay also has the most stringent rent control in the world. The rents in the city have been frozen since 1944. There's another reason Bombay attracts migrants. It is a dream city. Indians have mentally inhabited Bombay even if they've never stepped foot in it, because Bombay is home to the world's largest movie industry, Bollywood. Villages in distant Bihar and tribals in far Nagaland are met with the skyscrapers of Nariman Point or the beach at Juhu through their projected images in traveling tent cinemas. If cinema is a mass dream of the audience, Bombay is a mass dream of the peoples of India. But the challenges facing Bombay are huge. The municipal government is always on the edge of bankruptcy. The boss tweed of Bombay is a man named Bal Thackeray, the leader of the Shiv Sena, who was accused in an official report of having directed mobs of Hindu rioters against Muslims, like a veteran general in the 92-93 riots. But as with New York in the early 20th century, there are reformers waiting in the wings, civic groups determined to take their city back from the bosses. The more important trend is that the newcomers who migrate to the city have the power of the vote and exercise it much more diligently than the older, established inhabitants. In the last general election, Bombayites voted out the governing BJP party, favored by the technocratic upper and middle classes, in almost all the parliamentary districts of the city, and brought back the Congress, as did the country as a whole. The election result, which surprised the elites and most foreign observers, was commonly depicted as the revenge of the village against the city. Actually, it was the revenge of the poor against the rich. This is the difference between the world's two largest democracies. In India, the poor vote. What we're seeing in India today is the greatest transfer of power in world history, the real devolution of power to the real majority of the 1 billion people that live there. A huge transfer had taken place when the British left India and Pakistan in 1947. But an even greater shift was to come. In 50 years, independent India has done what 5,000 years of history could not do. It gave the people who are in the majority a voice in the running of the country. The Dalits, also known as untouchables, the scheduled castes and tribes, those specifically listed in the Constitution as historically having been discriminated against, and the other backward classes, form as a bloc the numerical majority in the country. For thousands of years, the upper castes, Hindu, Muslim, and Christian, had kept them out of power. But toward the end of the 20th century, the time had come. For the first time in history, the lower castes are coming into the political process, have a say in who gets to rule them. In 1997, an untouchable became president. Upper caste Brahmin ministers scrambled to touch his feet and ask for his blessing. A bill has come up in Parliament whose passage has the support of all political parties. It will reserve 1/3 of the seats in the highest legislative body in the land for women, an experiment unprecedented anywhere in the world. India frustrates description because everything you can say about it is true and false simultaneously. Yes, it could soon have the world's largest middle class, and it will soon be an economic superpower. IBM, for example, recently cut 13,000 jobs here and in Europe and is shipping them to India. Now I am facing the very real possibility that my children who live in New York, when they grow up, will find their jobs outsourced to the very country their grandfather left to pursue economic opportunity. But India also has the world's largest underclass. A quarter of its 1 billion people live below the poverty line. 40% are illiterate, and its child malnutrition rate exceeds that of sub-Saharan Africa. There's a huge difference between the backwater state of Bihar and the boomtown of Bangalore. It's the same with Bombay. Everything is expanding exponentially. The call centers, the global reach of its movie industry, its status as the financial gateway to India, as well as the slums, the numbers of absolutely destitute, the degradation of its infrastructure. The city's planners have their eyes set firmly on Shanghai as a model for Bombay. The government has approved of a McKinsey-drafted document titled Vision Mumbai, which aims to turn Bombay into, quote, a world-class city by 2013. As the architect Charles Correa said, that's not a vision, that's a hallucination. An example of what the future holds for us now is being seen in the Indian seaside state of Goa, not too far south of Bombay. Goa was discovered by Western hippies in the 1960s. They found a paradise where they could have moonlight parties on the beach and listen to Janis Joplin and get high dirt cheap. Today, Goa has a problem with the dirt, specifically garbage. You see, the Goans have traditionally used pig toilets. In most Goan village homes, you will find a flight of stairs leading up to a hole in the ground, which is the toilet. When you do your business, you hear the delighted squealing of pigs under the house as their supper falls on them. The pig eats, and in due time, you eat the pig. It was a thoroughly efficient, if somewhat indelicate, system of recycling. All that was before the hippies came, made Goa fashionable, and a whole slew of five-star hotels sprang up, most in the space of the last decade. The hippies were fine with the pig toilets, but those who stay in five-star hotels will object to such close contact of the porcine kind. They will not find the squealing of pigs conducive to their bowel movements. But Goa just doesn't have the infrastructure, the sewer systems, and septic tanks needed to cope with tens of thousands of new flush toilets. So the Goan government has a problem: what to do with the waste generated by the rich visitors, both human and artificial. It ran out of space in the designated town dumps. So it sent out trucks with its visitors' waste out into the countryside, dumping it onto any available patch of bare land along the highway, far from the cities along the coast. The villagers got wise to this and started watching out for the government garbage trucks. They started stoning them. The government is now sending armed police escorts with the garbage trucks as they scour the countryside looking for village land to dump their load. When the villagers throw stones at them, the police fire on them. Lives could be lost over garbage. Bombay, like Goa, needs to dramatically upgrade essential civic services: roads, sewers, transport, health, security. But, as one planner said to me, the nicer we make the city, the more the number of people that will come to live there. The greatest number of migrants to Bombay now come from the impoverished North Indian states of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. Bombay's problems can't be solved until Bihar's problems are. You have to keep them down on the farm. And that means that agriculture has to become viable again for the small farmer. Abolishing trade-distorting subsidies in the US and the EU would go a long way towards making, say, Indian cotton competitive with American cotton. Bombay is at the mercy of national and international factors beyond its control. We all, wherever we live, have a stake in helping the people of megacities like Bombay. The UN recently came out with a report that forecasts that 60% of the world's population will be living in cities by 2030. 2 billion people will be living in slums. The report warns of a race to the bottom as companies move capital and jobs across borders to cities with the lowest labor costs. The desperation of slum dwellers in cities like Bombay therefore directly affects the economic fortunes of people in New York or Los Angeles. The UN report also warns that these slums could be breeding grounds for extremism if cultural differences between older and newer migrants aren't managed well. It's as important for New York to understand Bombay as it is for Bombay to understand New York, if for no other reason than the next generation of New Yorkers is being born in Bombay. How does a city of 21 million people, which is Greater Bombay's population, survive? How does it make room for 1 million more people every year? I found the answer in the Bombay local trains. The manager of Bombay's suburban railway system was recently asked when the system would improve to a point where it could carry its 6 million daily passengers in comfort. Not in my lifetime, he answered. Certainly, if you commute into Bombay, you are made aware of the precise temperature of the human body as it curls around you on all sides, adjusting itself to every curve of your own. A lover's embrace was never so close. Asad bin Saif works in an institute for secularism, moving tirelessly among the slums, cataloging numberless communal flare-ups and riots, seeing firsthand the slow destruction of the social fabric of the city. Asad is from Bhagalpur in Bihar, site not only of some of the worst communal rioting in the nation, but also of a gory incident where the police blinded a group of petty criminals with knitting needles and acid and paraded them through town as an example. Asad, of all people, has seen humanity at its worst. I asked him if he feels pessimistic about the human race. Not at all, he responded. Look at the hands from the trains. If you are late for work in the morning in Bombay, and you reach the station just as the train is leaving the platform, you can run up to the packed compartments and you will find many hands stretching out to grab you on board, unfolding outward from the train like petals. As you run alongside the train, you will be picked up and some tiny space will be made for your feet on the edge of the open doorway. The rest is up to you. You will probably have to hang on to the door frame with your fingertips, being careful not to lean out too far lest you get decapitated by a pole placed too close to the tracks. But consider what has happened. Your fellow passengers, already packed tighter than cattle are legally allowed to be, their shirts already drenched in sweat in the badly ventilated compartment, having stood like this for hours, retain an empathy for you. Know that your boss might yell at you or cut your pay if you miss this train, and will make space where none exists to take one more person with them. And at the moment of contact, they do not know if the hand that is reaching for theirs belongs to a Hindu or Muslim or Christian or Brahmin or untouchable, or whether you were born in this city or arrived only this morning, or whether you live in Malabar Hill or Jogeshwari, whether you're from Bombay or Mumbai or New York. All they know is that you're trying to get to work in the city of gold, and that's enough. Come on board, they say. We'll adjust. Thank you.